The green certified mail slip clung to the official-looking envelope like a parasite. David Henderson stood at his community mailbox kiosk, the late afternoon sun warming the back of his neck. Yet a chill traced its way down his spine. It was the kind of envelope that never contained good news. It felt cold, impersonal, and heavy with unspoken consequences. He slid his thumb under the flap, the sound of tearing paper unnaturally loud in the quiet suburban air. His eyes scanned the letterhead Prestige Property Management, on behalf of the Oak Ridge Meadows Homeowners Association. Then, the subject line, Formal Notice of Violation. CC&R, Favor 8.4.2, Architectural Standards. A wave of cognitive dissonance washed over him. He flashed back to just 1 week ago, to the day after he and his wife, Elena, had moved in. The doorbell had rung, and standing on their new porch was a woman with a perfectly coiffed blonde bob, immaculate pastel sportswear, and a smile that was both dazzling and unnervingly symmetrical. In her hands, she held a wicker basket containing 4 enormous blueberry muffins, still warm and wrapped in a checkered cloth. "Welcome to Oak Ridge Meadows," she had chirped, her voice a practiced melody of cheerful authority. "I'm Carol Albright, the president of our Homeowners Association. We are just so thrilled to have you. I've heard you're an architect, Mr. Henderson. We value professionals here. It's so reassuring to know we're getting a conscientious new neighbor who understands the importance of maintaining our community's aesthetic." He had thanked her, accepted the muffins which were, admittedly, delicious, and felt a sense of relief. After the chaos and stress of the past year, the move from the city had been a gamble. Elena's recovery demanded tranquility, a place where the world was orderly and predictable. Oak Ridge Meadows, with its manicured common areas and meticulously uniform houses, seemed to promise just that. Carol's welcome had felt like a confirmation they had made the right choice. They were home. Now, holding this letter. The memory of her smile felt predatory. The word conscientious echoed in his mind, dripping with an irony so thick it was suffocating. He read the formal, sterile language of the notice, his architect's mind dissecting the phrase's unapproved structure. Failure to obtain prior written consent from the Architectural Review Committee. Obstruction of established view corridor. The structure in question was a garden shed. It was a modest, 6 by 8 foot structure he had assembled over the weekend from a high-quality kit. He'd painted it to precisely match the trim on their house, nestled it discreetly behind a mature Japanese maple on their private lot, well within every setback required by city code. It was for Elena, a place for her to store her pots, her soil, and the tools for the therapeutic garden she planned to cultivate. It was a symbol of their new, peaceful beginning. And Carol Albright, the welcoming committee herself, had just declared it an act of war. The cold, official paper in his hand was not a notice. It was a gauntlet thrown down on the perfectly manicured lawn of his new life. David's home office was his sanctuary. It was a testament to his belief that form and function were two sides of the same coin. Clean lines, muted colors, and an obsessive sense of order reigned. Architectural blueprints were neatly rolled in designated tubes. Reference books were organized by subject and author, and a large monitor displayed the CAD software he used to design buildings that were logical, compliant, and built to last. He was a man who lived by codes, specifications, and the unyielding truth of a plumb line. The world, to him, was a series of interconnected systems that, when properly understood and respected, resulted in harmony. This belief system was precisely why the HOA's letter was so jarring. It was illogical. It was an assault on the very principles he held dear. He had bought the house at 124 Chestnut Lane for its quiet cul-de-sac location and, ironically, for its thick binder of covenants, conditions, and restrictions on their first night in the house. While Elena slept soundly, exhausted from the move, he had sat in this very office and read the entire document, cover to cover. He'd highlighted relevant passages, made notes in the margins, and satisfied himself that the rules were reasonable, designed to protect property values and prevent chaos. He had specifically noted, where 8.4.2, the section on architectural controls, and deemed its requirement for committee approval on major modifications to be standard practice. He had not, however, seen a single word, clause, or subsection that mentioned a view corridor. The move was more than a change of address. It was a strategic retreat. A year ago, Elena had collapsed from what they later learned was a severe autoimmune disorder, triggered by chronic stress. The high-pressure world of David's commercial architecture firm in the city, the noise, the pollution, it had all become toxic. Her doctor's prescription was simple and absolute: find a place of peace. Oak Ridge Meadows was supposed to be that prescription filled. His first real interaction with a neighbor had been with Sarah Miller from next door at 126 Chestnut Lane. She was a kind-faced woman in her late 50s, with a sprawling, slightly wild garden that stood in gentle defiance of the neighborhood's otherwise rigid landscaping. She'd leaned over the low fence separating their properties, offering him a fresh lemonade as he struggled with a flat-pack bookcase. "Welcome to the neighborhood," she'd said, her smile genuine. "It's mostly quiet here. Just be mindful of the queen bee." The queen bee, David had asked, wiping sweat from his brow. "Carol Albright," Sarah had explained, lowering her voice slightly. "She runs the board. And by extension, she runs Prestige Property Management. They've been our management company for 10 years. Ever since Carol got elected, just be sure to get approval for everything. And I mean everything. She's particular, especially about that view." Sarah had gestured vaguely toward the rolling hills, visible between their two houses. At the time, David had filed the comment away as typical neighborhood gossip. Now, it felt like a prophecy. He'd built the shed over a weekend, a project of quiet satisfaction. It was well within his property lines, confirmed by the plot survey he'd received with his closing documents. He'd chosen a spot that blocked nothing but the view of his own back fence. The notion that it impeded a view corridor was, from an architect's perspective, absurd. An easement, or a designated corridor, would be a legally recorded instrument, clearly defined on the plat map. It wasn't a matter of opinion. He looked out the window at the shed. It sat there, small and unassuming, painted a tasteful taupe. It was a structure of hope. And now, it was Exhibit A, in a case he didn't understand, brought against him by a woman who had welcomed him with muffins and was now threatening him with formal proceedings. The quiet life he had purchased at great expense was already under siege. Before the certified letter, there had been an email. It had arrived 4 days after the shed was completed, and a full week before the formal notice. Dated October 5th. It was the opening salvo, a shot fired across the bow, disguised as a polite inquiry. "From compliance, a Prestige Prop MGT, com. To D. Henderson, Archimail, com. Subject, courtesy notice unapproved structure at 124 Chestnut Lane. Dear Mr. Henderson, welcome to Oak Ridge Meadows. This email serves as a courtesy notice from the Board of Directors. It has been brought to our attention that a new accessory structure shed has been erected on your property. Per the association's governing documents, all exterior modifications, including the installation of sheds, require prior review and written approval from the Architectural Review Committee ARC to ensure compliance with community standards. Furthermore, a complaint has been received from a neighboring homeowner Regarding the structure's placement, citing an obstruction of a designated view corridor, please note that maintaining these view corridors is essential to the aesthetic harmony and property values of our community. We kindly request that you submit an ARC application for the structure retroactively within the next 10 business days. The committee will then review the submission. Failure to do so may result in the issuance of a formal violation notice and potential sanctions as outlined in the CC&Rs. We appreciate your cooperation in this matter and look forward to resolving it amicably. Sincerely, the Oak Ridge Meadows HOA Board of Directors, CO Prestige Property Management. David's reaction had been one of professional curiosity rather than anger. A complaint about a view corridor was a tangible claim, a piece of data that could be verified. He was a man who believed in process. He had spent his career navigating complex zoning laws and building codes. A simple HOA matter should be straightforward. He logged into the homeowner portal provided by Prestige and downloaded a fresh copy of the CC&Rs, the bylaws, and the community rules and regulations. He spent an hour using the search function. The phrase view corridor did not appear, not once. The rules for accessory structures were clear. They had to be under a certain square footage, match the color scheme of the main house, and be placed within the property setbacks defined by the county. He had complied with all three. The requirement for prior ARC approval was also there. A procedural misstep on his part, he admitted. He had been so focused on city permits, which weren't required for a structure of that size, that he had overlooked the HOA's internal process. It was an honest mistake, one easily rectified by submitting the retroactive application they had requested. But the claim of a blocked view corridor was the part that didn't compute. It was either a real, recorded restriction, or it was a fabrication. And, if it was a fabrication, the entire violation was predicated on a falsehood. The courtesy notice, with its polite but firm tone, was the official start of the conflict. It was the first move in a game whose rules he was only just beginning to understand. Adhering to procedure, David decided to respond with precision and professionalism. He would not be emotional. He would be factual. He drafted an email that was a model of polite inquiry, the kind of communication he would use with a city planning department. From D. Henderson, arcwemail.com, to compliance@prestigeprop.mgt.com. Subject courtesy notice, unapproved structure at 124 Chestnut Lane. Dear Prestige Property Management, thank you for your email, dated October 5th. I appreciate you bringing this to my attention. I have attached a completed ARC application for the garden shed at my property, 124 Chestnut Lane, for retroactive review. The application includes photographs, a site plan showing its placement relative to property lines, and the manufacturer's specifications, including dimensions and materials. Regarding the mention of a designated view corridor, I have reviewed the recorded CC&Rs, bylaws, and published community rules and can find no reference to such a designation or any associated restrictions. To ensure I am in full compliance, could you please direct me to the specific article, section, or recorded plat map that defines this view corridor and its boundaries? I am confident we can resolve this matter quickly. Thank you for your time. Best regards, David Henderson, 124 Chestnut Lane. He hit send and felt a sense of control. He had provided what they asked for and, in turn, requested a specific, actionable piece of information. The ball was in their court. The response arrived 2 days later, on October 7th. It was not the clarification he had expected. From compliance@prestigeprop.mgt.com to D. Henderson, arcemail.com. Subject RE. Courtesy notice unapproved structure at 124 Chestnut Lane. Mr. Henderson. Thank you for submitting the ARC application. However, the issue of the structure's placement remains. The Board of Directors is granted broad authority under CC&R FR 8.4.2 to regulate and maintain the overall aesthetic standards of the community. This authority is not limited to explicitly enumerated rules, but extends to preserving the character and harmony of Oak Ridge Meadows, which includes historically respected view corridors. For your reference, please see the attached minutes from a 2019 board meeting where aesthetic guidelines were discussed. The board has a consistent history of enforcing these standards to protect the value and enjoyment of all homeowners. Your application will be denied due to the structure's improper placement. Please be advised that you have 14 days from the date of this email to cure the violation by removing the structure. Failure to do so will result in the escalation of this matter. Sincerely, Prestige Property Management. Attached was a 2-page PDF of board meeting minutes from 3 years prior. David opened the file. His brow furrowed. The document was a summary of a routine meeting, discussing landscaping contracts and holiday decorations. Then he saw a paragraph in the middle of the second page had been crudely redacted with a thick black marker tool. The sentences before and after it were vague, referring to a discussion about easement adjustments and aesthetic preservation. The black box was a void, a deliberate omission of information. This was no longer a misunderstanding. This was a stonewall. They had ignored his direct question about the location of the rule and responded with a vague reference to their own authority, backed by suspiciously altered evidence. The polite corporate language was a thin veil over a clear message. We are in charge. The rules are what we say they are. David felt a familiar, tight pressure build behind his eyes, the kind that preceded a migraine. This wasn't about a shed anymore. It was about the arbitrary application of unwritten rules. It was an affront to his professional ethos, to his core belief in order and fairness. They were trying to bully him, assuming he would simply capitulate and tear down the small symbol of hope he had built for his wife. They had severely misjudged him. The architect in David took over, when faced with an intractable design problem. He didn't get angry. He gathered data. This was now a design problem. The goal was to build a case so solid, so buttressed by facts and documentation, that it would be unassailable. He knew that the official records of a community, the ones that held legal weight, were not stored in the filing cabinets of a property management company. They were public records, filed with the county. His first call was to a man named Mark Renner. Mark was a retired title clerk, a legend in the local real estate community for his encyclopedic knowledge of the county recorder's office and his bloodhound-like ability to track down obscure deeds, easements, and covenants. He was a cantankerous Luddite who believed the digitization of records was a crime against history. But no one was better at navigating the dusty, paper-filled archives. David met him at a small diner that smelled of stale coffee and bacon. Mark, a portly man with thick glasses and ink stains on his fingers, listened intently as David laid out the situation. "View corridor," Mark snorted, taking a loud sip of his coffee. "That's HOA speak for, I don't like what you did, but I can't find a real rule against it. They're hoping you're too scared or too lazy to call their bluff. Prestige Property Management? Yeah, I know them. They send junior paralegals to the recorder's office who can't tell a plat map from a pizza menu." David hired him on the spot. Mark's mission was simple: pull the original, unredacted development plans for Oak Ridge Meadows, the official plat map recorded with the county, and the full, unredacted chain of meeting minutes filed by the HOA over the past 5 years. as required by state law. While Mark began his excavation at the county archives, David started building his evidence file. He created a new 3-ring binder, labeling it HOA Correspondence. Inside, he placed the initial courtesy notice, his polite response, and the management company's stonewalling email. He printed the redacted minutes and placed them in a plastic sleeve. He took a dozen high-resolution photographs of the shed from every conceivable angle, ensuring each was time-stamped. He printed a copy of his property survey, highlighting his lot lines. He downloaded and printed the entire CCNRs, placing color-coded tabs on every section pertaining to architectural control and board authority. Each tab divider in the binder was a small act of defiance. The certified letter, the one that had started it all, arrived a week after his email exchange, dated October 14th, with a USPS tracking number he dutifully recorded. It was the formal violation notice. It was a sterile, escalated version of the email, citing Figure 8.4.2 and demanding the removal of the shed within 30 days. He filed it in the binder. Then, on October 28th, the final official document in the due process chain before the hearing arrived. Again, by certified mail, a notice of hearing. It informed him that, his informal appeal having been denied, he was scheduled to appear before the Board of Directors on November 15th at the Oak Ridge Meadows annual meeting to plead his case. The notice was laden with threatening language, outlining the board's power to levy an initial fine of $500 plus daily accruing fees of $25 for every day the shed remained. It concluded with a chilling sentence about the association's right to place a lien on his property for any unpaid fines and legal fees. The threat was no longer abstract. A lien was a real, tangible cloud on the title of his home, the sanctuary he had bought for Elena. It could impact their credit, their ability to refinance, and, in a worst-case scenario, could even lead to foreclosure. The stakes had been raised from a simple dispute to a direct threat against his family's financial security. He closed the binder, the weight of it feeling heavier than the sum of its pages. The battle lines were drawn. On the 1st of November, a crisp autumn Tuesday, Mark called. He didn't say hello. Got it. He grunted into the phone. You need to see this. My office. Now. David drove to Mark's small, cluttered office, a converted garage filled with filing cabinets and the scent of old paper. Mark had a massive, blueprint-sized document spread across his desk. It was the official, recorded plat map for the Oak Ridge Meadows development, bearing the embossed seal of the county recorder. Here's your lot, Mark said, his finger tracing the clean, precise lines of 124 Chestnut Lane. And here's your neighbor, Sarah Miller, and here's the lot on the other side of her, 128 Chestnut Lane, which belongs to one Carol Albright. He tapped the map firmly. Look closely. You see utility easements here, and a drainage easement here. What you don't see, anywhere in this entire subdivision, is a single notation, dedication, or restriction labeled view corridor. It does not exist, legally. It is a fiction. This was the confirmation David expected, the cornerstone of his defense. But Mark wasn't finished. He picked up a sheaf of papers next to the map. This is where it gets interesting, he said, a glint in his eye. These are the unredacted meeting minutes from the county file. Remember that black box they sent you from that 2019 meeting? He slid a page in front of David. It was the same page from the PDF, but this time, the text was whole. David read the formerly redacted paragraph, his heart rate quickening with each word. A motion was made by Board Member Thomas Gable and seconded by Board Member Linda Chen to approve the request by homeowner at 128 Chestnut Lane, Carol Albright, for the vacation of the 10-foot public utility easement located along the rear property line of said lot. The purpose of this vacation is to accommodate the construction of a planned patio extension. The board finds that the utility services can be adequately rerouted, and the vacation of said easement does not constitute a material detriment to the community. The motion passed 3-2. David looked up at Mark, the pieces clicking into place with an audible snap. She had a utility easement on her own property, David said, thinking aloud, and she used her position on the board to make it disappear. Bingo, Mark confirmed. A public utility easement is a major restriction. It severely limits what you can build. By vacating it, she effectively added thousands, maybe tens of thousands, of dollars to her property value. She got a bigger, more valuable backyard, free and clear. It was a slick, self-serving move, likely improper, and voted on by her friends on the board. The motive was, suddenly, blindingly clear. It was never about his shed. It was about what his shed represented, his fight, his research, his demand to see the official plat map. It was a threat. If he successfully used the official, recorded map to defend himself against a non-existent view corridor, it would set a precedent. It would draw attention to the map as the ultimate source of truth, potentially inviting scrutiny of other changes, like the mysterious disappearance of an easement on the board, president's own property. His small garden shed was a loose thread that, if pulled, could unravel her entire carefully woven tapestry of power and financial gain. Carol Albright wasn't just on a power trip. She was engaged in a cover-up, and he had just become the target she needed to neutralize. A few evenings later, as dusk settled over the neighborhood, there was a soft, hesitant knock on David's front door. He opened it to find Arthur Hemlock, an elderly man from down the street, whom David recognized from the board member photos on the HOA website. Arthur had lived in Oak Ridge Meadows since it was built, a quiet widower who mostly kept to himself. "Mr. Henderson," he began, his voice low and raspy, his eyes darting nervously toward the street. "May I have a word in private?" David invited him in. Arthur stood awkwardly in the foyer, refusing the offer of a seat. He held a worn felt hat in his hands, twisting the brim. "I'm on the board," he said, stating the obvious. "I was one of the 2 nay votes on that easement issue back in 2019. I didn't like the smell of it then, and I don't like it now." He sighed, a weary, defeated sound. Carol has most of the board in her pocket. They vote how she tells them to. I'm telling you this because I believe in doing the right thing, and what's happening to you is not right. He leaned in closer. "I saw the agenda for the annual meeting. Your hearing is on it, just as the notice said. But she scheduled it last, dead last, after the treasurer's report, the landscaping budget approval, and the holiday decoration debate. It's a classic tactic. The meeting starts at 7. Your hearing won't come up until 9:30. Maybe later. By then, most of the homeowners will have gone home. You'll be left with a skeleton crew, mostly her allies. She's not giving you a hearing. She's staging a public execution in an empty room." The information landed like a punch. David had been preparing his evidence, but he hadn't considered the environment. He had pictured a reasonable, if skeptical, audience of his peers. Carol was engineering a scenario where he would have no one to appeal to. "What can I do?" David asked. Arthur's eyes met his. "You're an architect. You know that the foundation is everything. Our foundation is the bylaws. Follow them to the letter. Section 4.5 of our bylaws states that any homeowner presenting at a hearing may submit a packet of documentary evidence to the board, provided it is delivered to the management company no less than 48 hours prior to the meeting. Do it. Make them acknowledge receipt. Make 10 copies. Bring them with you. When you speak, you hand a copy to every board member. They won't be able to claim they haven't seen it. Use their own rules against them." He paused at the door, turning back one last time. "And one more thing. You only get 5 minutes to speak. That's it. They'll have a timer. Make every second count." Arthur tipped his hat and slipped out into the night, leaving David alone in the hallway. He now had not only the evidence, but also a strategy. He had to prepare not just a defense, but a performance, a 5-minute masterpiece of logic and revelation, delivered in a hostile theater of Carol's own design. The Oak Ridge Meadows Community Clubhouse smelled of stale coffee and industrial-grade carpet cleaner. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a sterile, unflattering glow on the 20 or so homeowners scattered among 50 folding chairs. On a low, carpeted dais at the front of the room sat the 5-member board of directors, with Carol Albright at the center, a portrait of calm, executive control. To her right, a large projector screen displayed the meeting agenda. David sat in the third row, his wife Elena's hand resting on his arm, a silent anchor of support. On the chair beside him was a leather briefcase containing his binder and 10 meticulously assembled evidence packets. He had followed Arthur's advice, couriering one packet to Prestige Property Management 2 days prior and getting a signed receipt. He endured the next 2 hours as the meeting droned on. A monotonous treasurer's report, a mind-numbing debate over the rising cost of seasonal plantings for the common areas, a 15-minute argument about whether the holiday lights should be pure white or multicolored. As Arthur had predicted, homeowners began to trickle out, tired, bored, or needing to relieve a babysitter. By the time Carol finally announced the last item on the agenda, fewer than a dozen residents remained. "Finally," Carol said, her voice betraying no fatigue, "we will move to the violation hearing for the property at 124 Chestnut Lane. Owner David Henderson." The projector screen changed. It now showed a single slide with his name, his address, and, in the top right corner, a large digital countdown timer, preset to 0500. "Mr. Henderson, you have 5 minutes to present your case, after which the board will deliberate. Please approach the lectern." David felt a surge of adrenaline, but his movements were calm and measured. He walked to the front, placed his briefcase on the floor, and set the 10 evidence packets on the lectern. He walked along the dais, placing a packet in front of each board member, including a stunned-looking Carol, whose smile tightened fractionally. He returned to the lectern, looked out at the small, tired audience, and took a deep breath. "Good evening, members of the board, and fellow homeowners," he began, his voice steady and clear. He clicked a small remote in his hand, and the image on the screen changed to his first slide. The timer started its silent descent. Row 4, 59, row 4, 58. "I am here tonight regarding a violation notice for a garden shed on my property. The notice cites a violation of CC&R Section 8.4.2 Architectural Standards, due to the alleged obstruction of a view corridor." His slide displayed the full text of FERGR 8.4.2. "I have read this section, and indeed our entire governing documents, multiple times. As you can see, this section grants the board authority over aesthetic standards, but nowhere does it create, define, or even mention a view corridor. The term does not legally exist in our covenants." 0402. He clicked the remote. The screen now showed a high-resolution image of the official, county-recorded plat map of Oak Ridge Meadows. It was large, clear, and irrefutable. "This is the official plat map for our community, obtained from the county recorder's office. It is the legal blueprint of our neighborhood. I've highlighted my property. 124 Chestnut Lane. A red box appeared around his lot. As you can see, there are clearly marked utility and drainage easements. There is no recorded easement or restriction for a view corridor on my property, or any other property in this document. Therefore, the primary justification for this violation is based on a rule that does not exist and a restriction that is a legal fiction. DO 3:15. A low murmur went through the remaining homeowners. Carol's expression was hardening into a mask of polite fury. He clicked again. The screen split into two columns. On the left was the redacted document he had been sent by Prestige. On the right was the unredacted version from the county records. He used a digital highlighter to draw a bright red box around the critical paragraph in both versions. In its correspondence, the management company provided these redacted 2019 meeting minutes as justification for the board's broad aesthetic authority. This is the unredacted version from the public record. The redacted section details a 3-2 vote by this board to vacate a 10-foot public utility easement on the property at 128 Chestnut Lane. He paused for a beat, letting the information sink in. That is the property owned by our president, Ms. Albright. This action, which directly increased the value and utility of her own property, was hidden from me when I requested documentation. The only conclusion is that the enforcement action against my shed was not about a non-existent view, but about preventing any inquiry that might lead back to this questionable decision. O2, Row 5. The room was utterly silent now, save for the hum of the projector. Carol was pale, her knuckles white where she gripped her pen. David was about to deliver his final, pivotal point, the secondary moral twist. He could have stopped there, his own case made, but Arthur's words, and the sight of Sarah sitting in the front row, looking confused and betrayed, compelled him to go further. He clicked the remote one last time. The plat map returned. But now, there was a bright yellow line tracing the path of the original utility easement across Carol's property, and a dotted red line showing how its removal had shifted the logical access point, burdening the property next to it. And finally, David said, his voice ringing with conviction, this is the most important part. Vacating an easement doesn't make the utility company's need for access disappear. It simply shifts the burden. In this case, it created an unrecorded, implied easement that now falls directly across the property of my neighbor, Sarah Miller, at 126 Chestnut Lane. Without her knowledge or consent, this action, taken to benefit one board member, potentially devalued and encumbered the property of another innocent homeowner. He turned from the screen and looked directly at the board, his gaze resting on Carol. My shed is not the issue tonight. The issue is the board's fiduciary duty. It is the integrity of our governing documents and the transparent application of our rules for the benefit of all residents, not just a select few. Therefore, I am not just asking that you dismiss my violation. I am formally moving that this board commission a full, independent, third-party audit of all board decisions, easement adjustments, and financial records for the past 5 years, to restore faith in this community's governance, and to ensure all homeowners' property rights are protected. He finished with 10 seconds left on the timer. He had not accused Carol of a crime. He had simply presented the facts, laid out on an unassailable foundation of public records, and asked the board to do its duty. The trap she had set for him had become her own. The silence in the clubhouse was absolute. The 5-second beep of the timer expiring was jarringly loud. For a moment, no one moved. Carol Albright sat frozen, a flicker of genuine panic in her eyes, the look of a person whose carefully constructed world was collapsing in on itself. She opened her mouth to speak, but before she could, Arthur Hemlock's frail voice cut through the tension. I second the motion, he said, his voice surprisingly firm. Another homeowner, a man David didn't know, stood up. I also second that motion. I want to know if my property has been affected. 2. The tide had turned. The small audience was no longer apathetic. They were a posse. The board members exchanged panicked glances, their loyalty to Carol evaporating under the harsh glare of public scrutiny. The board's vice president, a man who had previously been a staunch Albright ally, cleared his throat. A motion has been made and seconded, he announced, avoiding eye contact with Carol. Let's first vote on the matter at hand. All in favor of dismissing the violation against 124 Chestnut Lane, with prejudice. 4 hands went up instantly. Carol's remained on the table. The motion carries. The violation is dismissed with prejudice. The vice president declared, now, for the motion to commission an independent audit. All in favor. Again, 4 hands shot up. Arthur's was first. The motion carries, he said, a note of finality in his voice. The board will table all other new business and will immediately begin the process of retaining an independent legal and financial firm to conduct a full audit as requested. It was over. Carol's authority had not just been challenged. It had been shattered, without a word. She began gathering her papers, her movements stiff and jerky. Her hands were trembling. She did not look at David. She did not look at anyone. She stood, turned her back on the room she had commanded for a decade, and walked out the door into the darkness. The queen bee had been deposed. Weeks later, the community was transformed. An email from the interim board, now headed by Arthur, informed the residents of the audit's initial findings. The results were damning. Carol Albright and 2 other board members formally resigned. The management contract with Prestige Property Management was terminated by a unanimous vote, citing gross mismanagement and a conflict of interest. A new local company was hired with a mandate of complete transparency. David, having earned the community's trust, was asked to fill one of the vacant board seats and to head a new architectural review committee, tasked with rewriting the guidelines to be clear, fair, and based solely on the recorded governing documents. The peace he and Elena had sought was finally descending on Chestnut Lane. The garden shed stood proudly in the backyard, a small monument to a victory hard won. One evening, Arthur stopped by. He was carrying a thin, worn manila folder. I thought you should see this, he said, handing it to David. David opened it. Inside were 2 sets of documents, nearly identical to the violation notices he had received. They were for 2 different properties, dated 2 and 4 years prior. Both involved unapproved fences. Both homeowners had received escalating fines and threats from Prestige Property Management. Both, David saw from a quick property search, had sold their homes and moved away within a year of the dispute. They both complained about Carol's patio blocking their view, but they did it informally. Arthur explained quietly. She used the ARC to push them out before they could figure out what she'd done with the easement. They were good people, but they weren't architects. They didn't know how to dig for the blueprints. He looked at David, a deep sense of gratitude in his old eyes. We just needed someone who knew how to finish the fight. David closed the folder. He looked out his window at the quiet street, at Sarah's garden thriving next door, at the neighborhood bathed in the warm glow of dusk. He realized his victory wasn't just for himself, or for Elena. It was for the families who had been forced out, for Arthur, who had been silenced, and for a community that had forgotten what it meant to be governed by principle instead of power. The battle had been long and stressful, but the foundation he had laid was sound. They were, finally, home.